Good evening, everyone, and welcome to MOS Live. Today, my name is Katie. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm going to be keeping an eye out for all of your questions about dinosaurs. So if you're joining us from Zoom to ask those questions, you can head to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type those in. If you're joining us from Facebook or YouTube, we're so sorry, but at this time, we are not able to see your questions or comments from there during the broadcast. If you'd like to see closed captions, head to the bottom of your screen and hit the CC button. At this point, I'd like to invite our presenters to turn on their cameras and introduce themselves.
Well, here we all are. Hello, everyone. My name is Janine. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. Let's see. Oh, yes. We decided we're going to introduce ourselves today with our favorite prehistoric beast that's not a dinosaur. And one of my favorites is called Tiktaalik. It's sort of looks like a fish, but it was one of those first animals that went from land or from water to land and really kind of bridged that gap of moving onto the land, what we call a tetrapod. And it lived like 375 million years ago. A very strange looking animal, a combination of fins, but it had lungs and could kind of support itself a little bit on land. So that's one of my favorites, a critter named Tiktaalik.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pablo. And one of my favorite critters or animals that is not a dinosaur, prehistoric animal, is a shark that is called Helicoprion. I always have to look for the name. But it was this shark that had this kind of like this, it looks like a wheel of teeth in the lower jaw. So it's this very bizarre looking animal. And scientists are not entirely sure. They've kind of reconstructed the fossil in many ways, different times to figure out how those jaws really looked like. But as far as we can tell, it just seemed like it almost looked like a conveyor belt of teeth, which sound very scary. And I'm very grateful that we don't have those in our oceans today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susan. My pronouns are she, her, and my favorite non-dinosaur prehistoric animals, probably, it changes all the time as my favorite dinosaur does too, but I love pterosaurs. I love the flying reptiles. They're amazing. To think that things that big that were alive and flying, some of them as big as planes, as big as jets. I also see, I wanted to let people know that I see Zoom is not working for some of you. So if you want to join us on Facebook, we are live on Facebook and you can see us there. And we'll actually try to see if Katie or if I or someone can check out the questions if you want to post them on Facebook so we can see some of them there. This will be the one and only time we'll try to grab some questions from you off of Facebook. So thanks, Katie. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, everyone. All right, so first question, trying to set the scene a little bit. How long ago did dinosaurs actually live?
Well, we could answer that in a couple ways. We kind of said before we were talking about prehistoric creatures that weren't dinosaurs. So there's the prehistoric dinosaurs that many of us think of with Tyrannosaurus Rex, Triceratops, all of those kind of classic ones. And they all went extinct about 66 million years ago. However, I'm actually not positive where my colleagues here stand on that, but many of us would probably say that dinosaurs are technically still alive today in the form of birds. And so I see my colleagues are nodding, they're agreeing that birds are considered modern day dinosaurs. If you want to get a little more technical, you can put dinosaurs, birds, and even many reptiles into an archosaurs category, which encompasses all of that. It's getting a little more technical, but basically I would say that what we think of dinosaurs died out around 66 million years ago, but dinosaurs technically are still alive today in the birds that you can see all around us.
Yeah, and the earliest things scientists consider dinosaurs are way back like 250 million years ago. And that transition between what came before and dinosaur time, there were some characteristics that scientists look for in the skeletons of these animals, the way their hips are shaped and the way their jaws are shaped. But there, before that time, before 250 million years ago, there were some animals that looked very, I'll say, reptilian. But they were, that group would evolve into, over many, many years, many millions of years, the group we consider to be dinosaurs.
All right, thank you. And we do have a question from Facebook kind of going off of that. So these animals that we think of as dinosaurs, like what we would see in maybe some popular movies like Jurassic Park or Jurassic World, would it be possible to make those dinosaurs and have them live today?
Ooh, that's a fun question, isn't it? Susan, you can tell us a little bit about the genetics in a moment, but I know there have been a couple of prominent paleontologists who have done some thought experiments around what it would take to use modern day animals to potentially house some DNA from an animal that lived during dinosaur time. But first how would they get the DNA? Jack Horner is one of them who's done this thought experiment around, could a chicken-like animal possibly look more dinosaur-like if we messed with its DNA and be more like a dinosaur? Not one of the dinosaurs that lived that long ago, but start to have some of the characteristics that we consider like, oh yeah, the teeth and the claws, something you would say that was less bird-like, what we consider birds today, and more dinosaur-like. And that's kind of an interesting, he did a whole series of talks on this idea.
Yeah, I mean, find it, basically what Janine, I don't even know how to expand too much from what Janine said. We're probably not going to get DNA that's that old. People are trying to resurrect or re-evolve extinct animals that aren't quite that old, where we do have their DNA, like mammoths. But even then, we're not taking mammoth DNA and growing a mammoth. Even then, we're taking modern day, or attempting to take modern day animals, in the mammoth case, an elephant, and changing parts of the elephant DNA that we already know works. We know there's not a hole in it or something, and trying to change just certain parts to, again, make it more mammoth-like. So in the next, century or so, I think the closest we'll come is maybe making, birds more dinosaur-like. I don't think it's not going to be a bug that sucked on the blood of a dinosaur and then became encased in amber, and we're going to get DNA out of it. DNA does not last that long. But there's definitely the reverse engineering or making them look more like a dinosaur is definitely fun to think about. As long as they're not meat eaters, I think. I think it's cool to see a meat eater, but really you need to, why more teeth? Like Triceratops would be just as cool.
Have any of these ancient dinosaurs with the big teeth been found in Massachusetts? Any of their fossils, I should say?
I can take this also. So New England is not great for fossil preservation, or even 66 million years ago or 100 million years ago, it wasn't great for preserving fossils. You need a specific type of rock. Well, there's a couple different kinds, but you need a certain type of rock to be able for a fossil to actually form. And those rocks that we have in New England are really not great for that. You want the kind that you see out west, where you see layer and layer and layer and layer. Those are great. But the other issue is, even if those rocks were here, if you look around New England, look around Massachusetts, we don't have a lot of exposed rock. So even if they were there, it'd be even harder to find than, again, like out west, where you can see all the rock that's there, and it weathers away and it wears away, wind and rain, and you can see rock that is 65 million or 100 million years old out there. Here it's covered in forests, it's covered in cities, it's covered in roads. But we do have one type of fossil that's very common around here. I don't know if either of you want to talk about the footprints that we have up here.
I can do that if, unless Pablo wants. Do you want to take that one?
No, I think you'll probably be able to elaborate a little bit more. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so you find along the Connecticut River Valley here in New England, along the Connecticut River, are lots of dinosaur footprints. So even though we don't have like fossil bones or teeth from dinosaur time, we do have some footprints, and quite some really amazing, well-preserved areas where there are footprints. And most of these, I'll say most, not all, but most tend to be small, three-toed, two-legged, what am I saying? Two-legged, three-toed dinosaurs. And, you know, scientists try to match those footprints to dinosaurs they knew lived at the time. So it's like Coelophysis is a likely candidate for one of the dinosaurs that lived here in New England.
Awesome, thank you. And then branching off of that, have there been dinosaur fossils found under the sea?
Ooh. Under the sea is a tough place to look for dinosaur fossils.
Yeah, I mean, you can, so one thing when you say under the sea, the world looked very different millions of years ago. And so if you think, we'll take North America and the United States for one, most of us are most familiar with that. The whole central United States was under a sea. It was a giant inland sea. And but it's obviously not a sea now, but if you go hunting for dinosaur fossils in where the sea was, and it was a time when that sea was there, you'll find water fossils. You'll find, there's a place in Wyoming, it's actually called Shell, Wyoming, because there are just shell fossils from 150 maybe, you have to go back a little further, a million years ago. And it's just, it was at the bottom of this sea. And so if right now we're gonna have a hard time looking at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean to see if there's any fossils down there. But if you think about that, you know, maybe the shorelines were different. And so maybe, you know, coastal areas around the world were once underwater. So you can find some underwater fossils, just not underwater anymore.
I would add that usually people think about dinosaurs as being terrestrial, and that is basically correct. That's basically what it is. But every now and then we do find some fossils that maybe say that some animals could kind of creep into the sea a little bit more, and there's some interesting evidence that we find in fossils that maybe behaved a little bit more. I don't know, in my head, I think about it a little bit more like a crocodile with kind of a long tail being able to move around. So definitely there were all sorts of adaptations in order to live on this planet. But for the most part, they were terrestrial animals. So probably they were being preserved in areas that were terrestrial. But as Susan said, under the right circumstances, everything can get preserved and then lifted up over millions of years, and we can then dig them up and get some good evidence out of it.
Thank you. So we have a question from Facebook, and I'm kind of going to think back to some of our Dogs Ask a Scientist that we had several months ago. We talked a lot about different breeds of dogs and the concept of dog breeds. I'm not sure if dinosaurs had breeds necessarily, but could different kinds of dinosaurs produce offspring? Were there golden doodles of the dinosaur world?
Wow, that's a fascinating thing to think about. So here's one of the challenges with dinosaurs. There are more than 1,000 named species based on fossil evidence. But that fossil evidence tends to be difficult to come by. So a species might be named for one find where there's one partial skeleton. It's a partial skull and maybe a shoulder and maybe a foot. So thinking about how we think about species today, there's like minute variations among, different breeds of dogs. But a species has these really broad sort of characteristics that kind of group them as a species. So I would say the way paleontologists think of it right now, they are not thinking about breeds. They are just trying to name, like, is this individual a new species? Or is this individual, like, say something interesting, like there's this idea of Tyrannosaurus rex, and then there are smaller individuals that are very much like Tyrannosaurus rex. Are they a different species? Are they juvenile Tyrannosaurus rexes? So that's the kind of detail paleontologists are working with right now, instead of interesting sort of minute small changes. I love golden doodles, by the way.
And just to add to that, because a lot of times, so a species of an animal, it has the two names, so Tyrannosaurus rex. But a lot of dinosaurs, we know them primarily by that first name, which is their genus, and not even as their species names. So for example, Triceratops that you see behind me, and I have my little Triceratops friend here as well. Triceratops isn't even a species, it's a genus name. There's Triceratops horridus, and that's the only one I remember, but there's all these different types of Triceratops something and Triceratops something. So not only are we not sure about breeds, but even narrowing down species is even really difficult to do. But I have to say, I hadn't heard that question before, and I wonder, it was a great question though. I hadn't thought about it much before. It's kind of a fun thought experiment to think about.
And it's a problem that we have scientists have today too, right? They see a species here, say in the East Coast, and then they travel in any direction, north, south, or west, and they find one that it's very, very similar in another location. And then they ask, is this the same species, or is it a different species that kind of evolved over time because they're in two different locations? So it's something that scientists are always thinking about with live animals and with extinct animals too. So it's a great question.
So I think I may already know how Susan might answer this question, but I might be surprised. And for Janine and Pablo as well, Owen, who is 5, wants to know, what is your favorite horned dinosaur?
Ooh. Horned dinosaur, huh? Well, I'm gonna have to think about this for a moment. Susan, you go. Did you?
Katie knows, and because I oftentimes, it's possibly one of my favorite dinosaurs as well, and that's the Triceratops, just because of Cliff, because I feel like I know him better than other dinosaurs, and the fact that Cliff here, this particular fossil is 70% real. That skull that you see is the fossilized remains of an actual dinosaur. This isn't like a cast, but most of that is real. And to just picture this guy was walking around 66 million years ago, just mind-blowing. So yeah, Katie, I figure that's probably what you thought I was going to say.
Yeah,
that's probably my favorite horned dinosaur too, and honestly for the same reasons, because having Cliff at the museum, it just gives a lot more perspective to these animals, their size, and you can almost get a little bit more of a sense of how it like walked or maybe it roamed around. So I don't know, I think it really lets my imagination go wild when you spend some time in that exhibit. So I really like it, and it's just a great fossil.
It is an amazing fossil. I guess, Susan was talking about ceratopsians, the big group of that Triceratops is part of. There's one that's got 5 horns instead of 3, the Pentaceratopsian. That one looks really cool. And one of the things when it comes to like these sort of the horned dinosaurs, that are like Triceratops that are really unique through all of all the huge expanse of animals here on the planet Earth, is their horns are bone, right? They grow right out of their heads. Where like a rhino, its horns are hair, and like with some of the other horned animals, their horns are
Keratin.
ivory.
Yeah, it's like a keratin type, like
Keratin.
it's hair or nail or something. Yeah.
I find that fascinating, that this is one of the few animals that their horns are just solid bone growing right out of their skulls. That's kind of cool.
So speaking of bones, I would actually like to ask Harrison, I should say, has a question that is, how many bones did a T-Rex have? And I think that's fascinating because, as Susan mentioned, Cliff is a very complete dinosaur fossil. So a lot of times when we find fossils, there's many bones and pieces that we don't have. But what about the T-Rex?
I don't think I have a number off the top of my head.
I just Googled, is that okay? But I'm going to expand on it because these aren't just questions you can Google and get answers. But I wanted to see if there was an exact number out there. And it says probably around 200 bones, which is kind of how many humans have and most animals. Two things to mention with that, though. One, there's never been a T-Rex skeleton where we've found every single one of its bones. That being said, we've probably, if you put all of the T-Rexes that have been found, we've probably found most of the bones of all of them, of it, like one of each bone.
Yeah.
Possibly. So that's one, we haven't found a full T-Rex skeleton, but then it's just bigger than us, but it still has, 2 bones here and 1 bone here. Of course, well, I guess compared to mine, they're about probably the same size, but relatively speaking, they're very small for it. But so it's going to be very similar. It's going to have, a couple pieces to the skull. It's going to have the same number of leg bones. It's going to have probably less finger bones, less toe bones, but still have finger, toe, ankle bones. So it's going to have a lot of the same ones. They're just bigger. But most animals that are walking on 2 or 4 legs have, I guess, around like 200 bones, give or take. So
that's awesome. I was really hoping that we would get some comparative anatomy there. I'm very excited for that. Thank you, Susan. I wanted to know how close they were. So we have a question about some contemporary research. Have there been new fossils dug up in China recently? Is there any significance to those?
Ooh. I haven't read about anything like super exciting coming out of China, but here's the deal, friends. Like, every time you turn around, there's new fossil finds from across the globe. And China is a hotbed for small-ish feathered dinosaurs. They tend, the areas where they have a lot of fossils from dinosaur time tend to be these smaller things with well-preserved feathers. So that's what's really exciting. Generally, what comes out in China, I just haven't, I don't know, I don't have one off the top of my head right now.
Do you want to mention South America, though? You sent me that article last week for the sauropods.
Yes. There was a paper just came out with 2 weeks ago. There were 2 long-necked dinosaurs found in Argentina that are rivaling like some of the biggest dinosaurs that have been found at this point, and they're being described in very early stages. These papers just came out to kind of be like, hey, we're going to name these species and here's what we found. But once a species is kind of like on the map like that, there'll be lots more scientists who will look at those fossils and do research and compare them to other similar sort of fossils, or go back to that same area and look for more discoveries and see if they can add to that story.
Well, thank you very much for thinking on that for us. And of course, we're always constantly looking to add to the story in science. So look forward to the next Ask a Scientist Dinosaurs to see what more we all have learned. We are unfortunately all out of time for tonight's show. So at this point, I will invite our presenters to say their goodbyes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. And thank you so much to you all, our scientists who fought to tune in. Thank you so much for visiting us on Facebook, if you were able to, and asking those questions. It was quite fun to see you all popping up there. If you'd like to see more of our virtual offerings and what is happening, please visit www.mos.org/mosathome. And again, thank you for bearing with us. We actually rolled out some exciting new programs and software this week so that we could all better serve you. But we definitely learned a few things tonight. So thank you for joining us. And if you could support us in furthering our efforts, please visit engage.mos.org/welcome. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful night.